Hello, Riderflex Nation. Steve Urban here. And today, a special treat for you. My good friend Jo Stone is joining us on the podcast. She's the president of Fresh Produce. Hello, Jo, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate you being on. We're going to hit Jo with some questions here today, give you some advice from another executive besides myself. So, Jo, give us just a kind of a brief overview about yourself and your career.
So I started out as a wee little accountant coming out of university, and first couple of jobs I had were very financially focused, and then a mentor of mine said, "Hey, accounting, great career, but you could really top that off if you dipped a bit more into the operational side." So at that moment, I said, "Okay, I want to have a really full career." So I said, "Okay, well, let's see a little bit more about this operational side of the business." So I started doing more and more work on the operational side, coupled that with the financial side, and have been controllers for companies, moved up in terms of CFO, then played the CFO, COO role at a few apparel companies, and then I found myself with an offer to run a women's apparel company called Fresh Produce, and here I am as their president.
Awesome. Fantastic. Congratulations on an awesome career so far. Tell us a little bit about Fresh Produce. Give us kind of a quick overview there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great. Always like to talk about our company. We are a coastally inspired women's apparel organization. We sell to about 525 independent retailers across the nation. We have 16 company-owned stores in locations I would call the Smile Belt. So it's along the coastal area of the United States. And then we have our own e-commerce website.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Well, what do you think are three key contributing factors to your career success so far?
Oh, wow. I would say first and foremost, I have worked for some really great folks that have afforded me the opportunity to do varying things. So definitely the folks that I've worked for. Okay. I'd say I have a pretty strong work ethic. Was raised by for all intent and purpose, a single mom that had a really strong work ethic, and I took that from her. And I would say also a willingness to support those people that work for me, which is a characteristic or a trait that I learned from those great folks that I was telling you about earlier on.
That's fantastic. Looking back now, based on what you know now, what are three, two or three pieces of advice you'd give your 21-year-old self if you could look back?
Man. Let's see, my 21-year-old self.
And that was just a couple of years ago. So, right?
Yeah, I wish. My 21-year-old self, I would say, let's see, definitely take the time to not only explore your craft, your professional track, but also, take the time to respect and understand those that you work closely with. I think I was very focused. I would say take your vacation.
Right. Fantastic.
And never stop learning. Definitely. You learn every day as you are on the job, but take the time each and every day to explore outside of what the task-based or even the strategies that you're deploying week over week, month over month, and year over year.
That's great. Great advice. Speaking of advice, what kind of advice would you give people that want to move up or get promoted? Because you've done a good job of getting promoted right over the years. What advice would you give them?
Oh, thanks, Steve. I would say there's no substitute for hard work. Make sure that that you do self-promoting. It's not self-serving. That you be sure and call out those things to your manager, not from a "hey, look at me" standpoint, but be sure that your manager is aware of those things that you are helping out on from a company standpoint, and you raise your hand every chance you get, even if it's a little outside your realm of responsibility. Say, hey, I'm willing to pitch in for that. And that's where the extra time comes in, because it's not just, hey, I'll pitch in instead of doing the things that are my responsibility, but don't be shy about raising your hand and doing, a little more.
I couldn't agree more. That is absolutely great advice. Couldn't agree more. It's just so important to tell people what your goals and desires are, right? Supervisors can't read your mind.
Exactly.
This is one of my more favorite questions I like to ask people. What's an unusual habit about yourself that you think has helped you or your company the most over the years?
Wow, an unusual habit.
Or something that might be a little bit different, that maybe all executives don't do. Something unique about yourself.
Wow, this is a stumper.
It might be, from what I know from you, it might be that you're in the building at 5:45 a.m. every day. Maybe not every day, but.
Yeah, I mean, that is something. I drive that to the work ethic piece, but I do make it a point to come in early, leave late, and something that a mentor of mine, wink wink, taught me was, you got to walk around. You got to walk around. You have to get to know people. You have to. And I know a lot of folks say that, but I would say I make it a habit to do a little of that each and every day, no matter how packed my day is.
Great input. Appreciate you sharing that. That's a good one. How about this? What advice would you give a newly promoted executive, somebody that's just entering the C-level position for the first time? I know how that feels myself, and I know you know how that feels. What advice would you give that brand new COO or that brand new CEO just stepped into the C-level position for the first time?
Don't be afraid to let go of those things that made you comfortable in your last position.
That's good.
That there are things that you fall back on. Don't be afraid to get uncomfortable. And the third thing I would say is spend a little extra time in the morning actively preparing for those things, not that you need to do, but those things that you need to let go of. It's easy from a habit standpoint when you're first in that C-level role because it's a little uncomfortable, right? Even though you've dreamed of it all your life of, man, I'm where I always thought I wanted to be.
Right.
And then the pressure, you start to feel some of the outside pressure. I would say actively make a list of those things that you shouldn't be spending your time on that day.
That's good stuff, Joe. Good. That's some great career advice. Let me ask you a couple of questions here around interviewing. So for some candidate advice, what are a couple of your favorite interview questions that you like to ask, and why?
If it's okay if I don't go with the interview questions, but more of a style standpoint, is I like to have the candidate step outside of their CV or their resume. So I do the, hey, I see on paper here, but why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? What makes you tick? What brought you here? And not from, I was here for this many years and that for that many years, but, who really is Bob Smith? What makes you tick? What are the things that you can't wait to do X, Y, and Z as it relates to your professional goals and aspirations? So I really like that one because it's telling in terms of their personality, et cetera.
I've noticed that most executives that have a lot of experience interviewing people, there's a certain list of questions that you maybe you want to try to get to, but really a good executive, it's a little more conversational. And like you said, getting them to step outside of the norm a little bit, away from the resume. That's good.
Thanks.
And then I guess this kind of ties to that, but what are a couple of common mistakes or miscues, just in general, that you see candidates make in interviews? I know you've done probably 1,000 interviews. What are a couple of just common mistakes?
They don't come prepared for the interview, meaning either, they're having to read their resume as you're going down through it. They don't have their fluid, well, here's what I've done and here's what I'm kind of proud of. That's one of them. When you're sitting across from the president of a company and you ask them, so thanks a lot. What questions do you have for me? Oh, they've all been answered. It's like, that's a big one to me.
I
and I would say the third one probably is lack of enthusiasm.
Okay. I love that. I couldn't agree more. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Joe. And then, kind of wrapping up here, because I'd love for you to stay on the phone and ask you another 20 questions, but I know you have a company to run. In wrapping up, beyond those mistakes in interviews, is there any just, overall last piece of advice for candidates in general? Maybe what you'd call the single most important piece of advice for a candidate interviewing for jobs these days?
I would say, but be deliberate about the choices you make with respect to those roles that you are interviewing for.
Great.
And that's where I think the other things, be passionate, be deliberate. I want this.
That's great. That's great. Because you're right. So many of them are casually applying or casually interviewing, and it's not really what they want to do in life. That's good.
Right.
That's really good.
Okay.
Fantastic, Joe Stone. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I hope to be able to talk to you again soon and maybe grab you down the road here for more advice later on. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Thanks so much for asking. I really enjoyed our time here today.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.